Good morning, aviators. Today we are continuing the Absolute Beginner's Guide for the F-15C Eagle. This guide is meant for anyone who is new to DCS or is returning back to DCS guides after a hiatus. For those DCS veterans out there, your contributions are always appreciated in the comments below. This is attempt number 2 because I was very smart and didn't click the record button. But today we are going to learn how to read and interpret the F-15 HUD or heads-up display. So before we get going into what's on the heads-up display, let's talk about some controls. There's 4 basic HUD controls that you need to be aware of. The first is HUD color, which by default is right, control, and hotel. And there's about 10 different color and brightness settings, and I like this one right here. You can change the brightness directly, up or down. Starting with down, it's right Alt, right Shift, and H. Turns it all the way down, effectively turning it off. And then to turn it up, it is right control, right shift, and H. There you go. Then, if you only want to see the HUD and nothing else, it is Alt and Function 1. You get the radar scope as well, but the HUD's in front of you, and you don't see any of the cockpit. I like the other view better, so I'm going to go back. If you ever need to look up any of these controls or the controls on your own, go to Adjust Controls and search HUD, because I guess they could be different than yours. So how do you read this? Well, at the very top here, this is your magnetic compass or your heading scale. It's synced with the HSI and goes off of the magnetic compass. Now, is this heading 350, heading 00, heading 34? Well, you have to add a 0 to each of these. So 340, 350, and technically this is 360 because it's a 360-degree compass. Each of these ticks represents an additional 2 degrees, so 342, 344, 346, 348, and then 350. Coming to the left side, we have our airspeed information on our airspeed tape. And for those who use HUDs in general aviation or just used to glass cockpit, this heading, or a correction, airspeed tape might be upside down to you because the lower number is higher than the faster number. In military aircraft, the scale goes down as you increase speed, and it goes up when you decrease speed. Civil aviation is the exact opposite. When you go faster, the scale goes up. Something you might want to just be aware of. This caret indicates what our current airspeed is, like this caret indicates what our current heading is, and this caret indicates what our current altitude is. And this is our barometric altitude, and it's synced with the altimeter. And when it's set to 2 or 2 inches of mercury, that gives us our pressure altitude, which by default, that's what it set is. And you can't exactly see what you set because there's no Coleman's window, which is kind of annoying. But these indications go in groups of 100 feet. So 100 feet, 200 feet, 300 feet, 400 feet, 500 feet. So we are approximately 290 feet, so 6,290 feet above sea level. We have some other indications up here. On the bottom left corner, we have 2 sets of numbers, our current Gs and our max allowable Gs based on the configuration. Now no, this is not 10 Gs. You need to put an imaginary decimal point in between these. So right now we're experiencing 1 G with a max allowable sustained G of 9. In the right corner, we get some navigation information. We're in nav mode. We're going to waypoint 1. We're 1.6 miles and less than a minute from the waypoint. This is our assigned heading mark, or assigned heading index. We need to go to that heading to fly to the waypoint. We also have a bank steering index, which gives us information of where we need to turn to get to our heading. So we need to bank to the right. When you're at the correct bank, this will line up with this. Now what is this here? This is the flight path or velocity vector, and it's got 3 little spokes on it. 2 for the wings, 1 for the tail. If you put that tail spoke right on top of the bank steering index, it'll line you up and give you good course information and good bank information. We have this cross here, that is the gun's cross. That is where our gun is pointed or our cannon's pointed. And if we were to shoot rounds, that's where it would go. This right here is the aircraft datum symbol. because it looks like a W with wings. So if it makes sense to you, that's where the wings are pointed. But in reality, it's where the longitudinal axis of the aircraft is pointed. A straight line directly from the tail to the nose and towards infinity. And that's where it's pointed. This is where we're actually going. So this is where we're pointed. This is where the aircraft's actually traveling. And it is quite different. Over here is the angle of attack scale. And this is in units, not a degree setting. It's approximately 2 units per degree. So because we're at 14 units, we're approximately 7 degrees AOA. We also have pinch information starting with the horizon. This line goes across the HUD with only a little bit of gap in the middle. We have pitch increments of 5 degrees, nose up and nose down, and you can see 10 degrees nose down at the bottom there. Towards the ground is dashed while the sky is solid. I will not cover full navigation tutorials, but I'll show you how this bank steering index works. See how we lined up on the bank steering index, and then it continually makes corrections for what we need to bank to steer towards this waypoint. And look at that, we're also going to our assigned heading index. If I go toggle to waypoint 3, it sets up a little bit different. But that's how you follow the bank steering index. Okay, now I want to give you an example of what some ILS information that you can see on the HUD. So starting, we know we are in ILS navigation mode because it says ILSN. When you are flying over the outer marker, this is what you will see and hear. A marker beacon with about 2 tones per second. This shows us we're 2.2 miles from the localizer, approximately 1 minute out. And then we have our steering cross, our landing steering cross, which is right over top of the velocity vector, and that's what we want. We want to have the velocity vector right on top of that landing steering cross, and that'll take us all the way down to the runway. And if you see on our ADI, we are lined up on localizer and on glide slope. Now if I continue, take it off active pause, and it pitches up, which is okay. If we see this indication here, GSDN, that means glide slope is down, and we need to go down to catch the glide slope. Additional piece of information, when we get above AOA 18, we get it digitized there. Now we get a GS up, so that tells us we have a glide slope up, so increase power and catch the glide slope again. That is the middle marker, which only lasts for a second, and then there's no inner marker because this is not a Cat 2 or a Cat 3 ILS. Okay, let's start talking about our weapon systems and how they are shown on the HUD. So, first, we'll talk about using the gun with no radar information. This is our first gunnery mode, also known as the LCOS gun mode. So to do that, you select the cannon. If you have it set up like I do, it's the modifier button plus the trigger, and we get some information that pops up. We get the static sight cue, that's the first noticeable change, which is just below the gun cross and replaces the aircraft datum. We also have the number of bullets remaining, which is 940, just like it's shown on the multi-purpose color display. We are in the LCS mode, which means we have no radar information. This the static sight gauge does not move, and we're just effectively shooting right at this location. Now let's talk about incorporating radar. Okay, to incorporate the radar, we'll need to first turn it on, either by clicking I or whatever you have set up for the radar. We'll select the cannon, so we're in LCS mode, no radar information yet, but put that static sight over top of a bandit, which I see one over to the left here, and it should automatically lock on, and it sure did. Now let's talk about some information we have here. We still have the same amount of ammunition, but we are no longer in LCOS mode, but it's GDS, gun directed sight, gun director sight, which means we have radar information. We have a radar scale here, so 10 miles, 7.5, 5, 2.5, and 0 miles. We also see this range information digitized here, 4.1. This indication here, this letter, is our aspect of the target. T means we're tail aspect, which means we're chasing his tail. If it said H, we'd be heads on. He's coming right at us. L means it's the left aspect, we're looking at his left side. R means it's right aspect, we're looking at his right side. We also have our Mach indication come up. This tells us how fast we are relative to the Mach number. Now, if we look in where the static sight is really become a gun pepper, we have this, it's hard to see here, but there's an extra line around the static sight of the pipper, and we have this dot here. That dot here is the effective firing range. As we get closer, this outer circle unwinds counterclockwise and gets closer. When it has less of a value than that dot, we are in effective firing range. Each one of these ticks represents 1,000 feet, so when we're approximately 3,000 feet away from the target, or roughly half a nautical mile away, we are within effective gun ranges. You can start to see the tape unwind. As it gets inside there, we can fire. Now, where do we point to fire at the target? We want to put this pipper right on top of the target. We also have a target designator box letting us know if this is friendly or foe. Because there's no X, it is an enemy, and we put the center of the pipper on the target and squeeze the trigger. Splash 1. Okay, now let's move on to missiles, starting with the Sidewinder. We'll talk about unradar guided modes first. So the easiest way to do that is click 6 on your keyboard. That is the caged variant of the Sidewinder. Now, how do we know we have a Sidewinder? Well, down here in the bottom left corner, it says S2M. What does that mean? Well, S stands for Sidewinder, or short range missile. I have not found a definitive answer to which it represents, but either way, if you see an S, you have a Sidewinder selected. 2 is the number of missiles we have. Mike indicates that we have the Mike variant. We can also find this information on the multi-purpose display. We have a 9 Mike there and a 9 Mike there, so we do have 2 on board. We have the heat seeker where it's currently pointed, the smaller circle, and the field of view of where the seeker could actually look is the bigger circle. It's relatively small. Now, I'm going to unpause and put it over top of a bandit and see if we get a tone. Might be a little too far. We still have the same Mach information, but we have no ranging information. There we go. So once you have a tone, the field of view disappears. This starts waggling around because that's the heat seeker. And we got the 2 amber fire lights. Now, if we go just outside, we lose the lock. So how can we help us out a little bit? I'm sorry, we lose the tone. So how can we help us out? Let's uncage it. Press 6 again. We get a larger field of view. The heat seeker is uncaged. Now, we put the bogey anywhere inside that bigger field of view, we get a tone. Same amber fire light saying we have a good tone and can fire. And we can move around and have a lot greater steering error and still have an access to a shot. Okay, now let's talk about Sidewinders with radar. So turn on the radar. There's a bandit in front of me. I'll lock him up. There we go. And we have some additional information, which I'm going to push pause here for a second. We still have the Sidewinder because it's S2 Mike. Now we have an additional Mike here. There was only one M here previously, but now we have 2. That lets us know we have a missile that's in a radar that we're using with radar. We still have the heat seeker symbol, but let's talk about what we have new. Starting off at the bottom right, we have the digital range to target, 3 miles to target. We also could see this information here on the linear scale, where it goes 10, 7.5, 5, 2.5, and 0. We have a closure rate and a caret that indicates how far we are. That's the caret we use for the linear scale. And that's how fast in knots we're closing. So we're closing 178 knots to the target. This is the time to intercept if we were to fire a missile or the last missile that was fired. We are tail aspect. That's something we learned before. But now we have a circle with a dot. That dot is a steering circle a steering dot, and the circle we have near the datum is the ASE circle. That is the angular steering error circle. To have a good shot, that dot needs to remain within inside that circle. The heat seeker is still on the target, and we have a box letting us know we have a target designator, and it's a faux because there's no X through it. We do not have 2 amber lights, and we do not have an in-range cue. Let's talk about how we can determine if we're in range to target. It's kind of hard to see here, but there is a tick here and a tick here. The top one is max range, and the bottom is minimum range. So if I were to unpause and go full afterburner until we close, we'll see what happens when we're in range of the target. See our closure rate going up? There we go. Let's pause there. We had an extra tone come on. We had the 2 fire lights from before, and then we have this triangle. That is an in-range cue as listed by the manual. Think of it as a fire cue. You're good to fire. And notice how the angular steering error circle, the ASE circle, increased in size. Now we have a higher probability of getting the shot. So we can go up here and still obtain a good shot. But if that dot goes outside the circle, we lose our firing solution. We cannot shoot. We lose our firing cue or in-range cue. So the steering dot needs to be inside the circle, and it changes size depending on multiple factors. So right here we could take a good shot, and it would take 6 seconds to impact. But this is not a missile tutorial, so I'm not going to go over that. Okay, let's talk about Sparrows and the indications you see on the HUD. How do we know we have a Sparrow selected? Well, it says mic to mic. So the mic is the identifier for the Sparrow missile on the F-15C Eagle. 2, you could probably guess that there's 2 on board, and it's the mic variant of the Sparrow. If we were to look at a multi-purpose display, we have a Sparrow here, a 7 mic here, and a 7 mic here. So that indication is accurate. We are not using radar right now, so this missile is only being used with 1M. And we are in the flood mode. To get flood mode, you have to press 6, just like uncaging the seeker. Now, I'm not going to go into the specifics of how flood mode works. I'm just going to show you what you can see when you have a good fire solution. So in flood mode, you do not have to have a radar lock. You just have to have a bandit in the flood circle, which is approximately 12 degrees of circle. And this is the time it would take to get to a target, and we're in tail aspect, same as before. But we have no range information. There we go. Once we're in range of a target in flood mode, we'll see 2 amber lights, and we can go ahead and launch a missile, and once it's launched, the radar will pick it up and guide it to target. Now let's talk about some radar versions of the Sparrow. So first, you want to get a radar lock. So you lock it up, and let's look at the information we have. So it's still the Sparrow. We have 2 of them, but now because we're using radar, that second M shows up there. We have the same range information of the Sparrow, the same closure rate, digitized range to target, time to impact if we were to fire a missile, and the tail aspect of the target. But there are a couple things that are different. We have 3 ticks here. What do those ticks mean? Well, if we use the current logic, one would probably be max and one is minimum. That's true. We have max range for a target that is not maneuvering. That is called, sorry, I'm blanking it. That is called RPI. The top one, the farthest tick, farthest away from the target. I'm sorry, farthest away from the airplane. That's RPI. That's max range for a non-maneuvering target. RTR, or another way to think of it, is lethal range. If you're below that, you're within range where a target can maneuver and you could still most likely kill it. And then we have a minimum range to target. If we're inside of that last tick, we're too close and we'll get a big X across the screen, and I'll show you what that looks like. We have the same ASE steering circle as the Sidewinder. We have the steering dot, and we have the target designator with a triangle. That, if we remember, is our in-range cue or our firing cue, and we have 2 amber lights out here. Now let me show you what it looks like when we are too close, where we are too close to the target. Okay, so we have that X come up. If you see either one of those X variants come up, do not hit weapons release. There's one thing I've neglected to mention. The angle off line. This shows us where the target is traveling relative to us. So they're traveling away from us, slightly to the right. If this line was down here, they would be heading right at us. If it's on the left side, they're traveling left to our position. If they're traveling right, if the line's on the right, they're traveling right relative to our position. And the same goes for the Sidewinder and the AMRAAM when we talk about it. Okay, now we have the AMRAAM selective, and let's talk about how we can determine if we have that. The A is the indicator that we have an AMRAAM missile selected. Our field of view circle is also dashed. This is an active homing missile, so it is a fire and forget missile. It's in the visual mode. What does the visual mode mean? Well, if you were to have a bandit inside the circle within 10 miles and you were to fire the missile would automatically, its radar would automatically lock onto the first thing it sees, the closest, or the object with the largest radar cross section. We still have our Mach information. We're not using radar, so it's 1M. There's 4 on board, and it's the Charlie variant. Now, if we were to incorporate radar into this, let me unpause, lock him up, we get some more information. We have the target designator box. We have the ASE circle that is dashed because it's an AMRAAM, the angle off line, the linear range, which goes up to 20 miles for the AMRAAM, the digital range 2.8. This is the predicted time to intercept of the target. Now this M indicates that we are inside its active homing range. So basically the second we fire, it will automatically lock on with its own internal radar. If you're beyond a certain distance, it will use on-ship radar to navigate until it gets to the terminal phase of flight. Because we're using radar now, we have a second M here, and we're still tail aspect, and we have a closure rate of 24 knots. The major different thing we see here is the firing cue, or the in-range cue. It's basically 2 triangles, one upright, one upside down. It kind of resembles the Star of David. And we have the 2 amber lights. Those are the only major differences for the AMRAAM itself. Now that's all information for the AMRAAM before the missile is launched, but let's see some information that's given to us after it launches. So I'm going to click weapons release, and I'm going to pause here. So the missile's out. Oop, that was a bad second to pause. Here we go. We have a timer here. There's 2 possibilities, a T or an M. If you have a T, that is the time until it goes what's called pitbull, or it uses its own onboard missile radar. If it says T, that is time to pitbull, or time to terminal phase of flight. That is not time to intercept or time to target. That is the time until it switches to its own onboard radar. If you launch a missile and it says T, keep that target somewhere on your radar scope until you see the M. The M is time to impact. So roughly 4 seconds from now, we should have impact. And I'll let it play out to see how close it is. So 3, 2, 1. It's usually a second or 2 longer from my experience. And splash 1. Because we fired a missile, the number of missiles we have on board went down. Now let's talk about what you'll see when you're using auto acquisition mode, starting with Boresight mode. So I'm going to go to AMRAAM so it's a little quieter to start. And let's see what we have here. Same information before. AMRAAM, there's 4 of them, it's the Charlie variant. We don't have a radar lock of any kind, and we're in the visual mode. But we have this inner reticle, and that is the field of view for the radar Boresight. If it detects anything within inside 10 miles in this field of view, it will automatically detect. And this is listed in the manual as the scan area. So if we were to put a bandit inside that cone, we will automatically lock him up, and it reverts to a radar lock. Now, the range scale changed because we entered it from an air combat maneuvering mode, which Boresight is. So the range only goes up to 10 miles there. but the RPI and the RTR still remain as well as our minimum. With the Sparrow and Boresight mode, we still get those 2 rings. We put the target anywhere near the inner ring, and it automatically locks onto them, and we get the same radar information as before, and the same firing cues. If I were to unlock and select the Sidewinder, this is the one that might be the most confusing. This outside is the field of view of the seeker head. The middle circle tells you are in Boresight, and this is where the seeker is currently pointed. So, if we were to unpause, the circle still remains because you're in radar mode with the Sidewinder. You revert to your ASE circle. That's the same with all of them. Once you're locked up, the circle is not Boresight, it is for your ASE circle, your angular steering error, and your steering dot. The other automatic acquisition mode is vertical scan. You can tell this by the vertical line that appears from any of the missile selectors. So this is the AMRAAM, and we have a vertical line coming up from the datum. Same with the Sparrow and the Sidewinder. We'll start with the Sparrow. We could all see vertical scan is selected down below. So what are our scan parameters? 7.5 degrees side to side and up to 50 degrees up and 2 degrees down. You put a target anywhere inside that, it should be able to detect it. 50 degrees is approximately 2 HUDs worth of scan. So I tilted to the left, and somewhere on that line we locked up a target. I'm going to deselect. I'm going to show you again. I'm going to come off here to the left. I'm just going to bank to the right, nowhere near the target, and it should automatically just scan across that line and lock them up. So it's good when you're in turn fights, so you can scan directly above you while you're turning. And then it reverts to a regular radar lock. One more time, I'll show one more demonstration of the vertical scan. I turn to the left, nowhere near the target, and it automatically detects them ahead of my turn. Now, because I'm close to the mountains, it wasn't that efficient, and it does take some time for the sweep to go up. But that is how you use vertical scan. And that is everything we need to know about the HUD before we start flying and getting into air-to-air engagements. If you enjoyed this video or found it helpful in any way, please leave a like. If you'd like to see future videos, please subscribe. If you have additional questions or need help, leave a comment and I'll try to assist you. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the skies.